The rules for making a new state in the US? Surprisingly flexible, much more so than you might expect for something so important. You might imagine a strict checklist, a detailed set of requirements, but the Constitution just says Congress can admit new states. No step-by-step guide, no official playbook, just a broad invitation for Congress to decide. In the early days, this meant Congress could improvise, making up the process as they went along, adapting to each unique situation. Sometimes they'd pass an enabling act, which was basically Congress's way of inviting a territory to draft its own constitution and prepare for statehood. Other times a territory would just show up at Congress's door, constitution in hand, asking to join the Union. No invitation required, just a bold request. There was no single official process, just a few key ingredients, enough people to form a viable state, a Republican constitution that fit the American model, and most importantly, Congress's approval. Everything else was up for debate. Each new state set its own precedent, so the process was more like a muddy dirt road winding through the wilderness than a smooth, paved highway. Every journey was different, and sometimes the path was barely visible. For the first states after the original 13, like Vermont and Kentucky, the process was different every time. Each state's story was unique, shaped by local politics, national interests, and the personalities involved. Enter Ohio, the first state carved out of the Northwest Territory, and a perfect example of this ambiguity and improvisation in action. Ohio followed the general recipe: draft a constitution, gather enough settlers, and seek Congress's blessing. But it missed one crucial piece of paperwork, a small oversight that would spark a century of confusion and debate. Was Ohio ever a state? The answer is a journey through early American bureaucracy, the quirks of paperwork, and the fascinating difference between what the law says and what everyone simply assumes is true. Sometimes, the most important steps are the ones everyone just assumes happened, until someone checks the paperwork and realizes something's missing. The story of Ohio's statehood is about how a nation grows, and how messy, complicated, and even accidental that process can be. It's a reminder that history isn't always neat and tidy. It's a tale of flexibility, improvisation, and the power of shared belief, how a group of people can agree to move forward, even when the rules aren't entirely clear. So let's see how Ohio's path to statehood became one of America's quirkiest historical puzzles, a story full of missing documents, assumptions, and bureaucratic mysteries. And why, for over a century, people wondered if Ohio was ever officially a state at all, or if it simply became one because everyone agreed to act as if it was. In the early 1800s, the Ohio frontier was alive with hope and ambition. Settlers who braved the wilderness wanted more than just land, they wanted a voice in their own future. Tired of being governed from afar, these pioneers yearned for self-government, not distant rule from the east. Sensing the growing demand, Congress passed the Enabling Act of 1802. This crucial law gave Ohio's people the right to draft their own constitution, a first step toward true statehood and self-determination. Delegates from across the territory gathered in Chillicothe, the bustling heart of early Ohio. In a matter of weeks, they debated, compromised, and quickly wrote a constitution. Notably, they outlawed slavery, setting a bold precedent for the new state. With their work complete, the delegates sent the new constitution to Congress, expecting a formal welcome and official recognition as the nation's newest state. But instead of a grand ceremony, in February 1803, President Thomas Jefferson quietly signed a law applying federal laws to Ohio and creating a federal court district. There was no dramatic announcement, just the steady machinery of government at work. Congress began treating Ohio as a state, even though there was no grand declaration or official proclamation. It was as if statehood simply happened, almost by default. Eager to take charge, Ohioans didn't wait for Congress to spell things out. They held their own elections, formed a government, and started building the institutions of statehood before Congress had even finished acting. On March 1, 1803, Ohio's new legislature met for the first time. They passed laws, debated issues, and the governor officially took office. The machinery of state government was up and running. From that moment, Ohio functioned as a state in every practical sense, with its own government, laws, and officials working for its people. The federal government accepted Ohio as an equal member of the Union, and the 17-star flag soon flew proudly over the new state. Everything seemed settled. Ohio was acting like a state and everyone treated it as one. But beneath the surface there was one missing piece of the puzzle. There was no formal welcome to the Union resolution from Congress. The paperwork that usually marked a state's official entry was nowhere to be found. Life in Ohio went on as usual. Towns grew, communities thrived, and everyone assumed Ohio's place in the Union was secure. But that missing document would puzzle historians and legal scholars for generations, sparking debates and questions about Ohio's true status. Was Ohio's statehood ever truly official, or was it just assumed by everyone involved? The uncertainty lingered, casting a shadow over the state's origin story. This odd twist became one of America's most persistent historical quirks, a reminder that even in the nation's early days, bureaucracy could be as important as bravery. Sometimes the paperwork matters more than anyone expects. In Ohio's case, a single missing document turned a straightforward story into a lasting historical mystery. Ohio acted like a state, and the federal government treated it as one. Its representatives sat in Congress, its votes counted, and life went on. But if you check the records, there's no clear resolution admitting Ohio. Later states got a formal birthday certificate. Ohio didn't. This gap led to the myth that Congress simply forgot to admit Ohio. The truth? Congress didn't think a separate resolution was needed. The Enabling Act was the invitation, Ohio's Constitution was the RSVP, and the law applying federal statutes was the recognition. Passing another resolution seemed redundant at the time. The tradition of a formal admission act hadn't been established yet. Ohio's missing paperwork was just a quirk of evolving government habits. It wasn't amnesia, just early American improvisation. The idea that Congress forgot Ohio is irresistible. A state supposedly left in limbo for 150 years. Imagine an entire state existing in the shadows, its status uncertain, while the rest of the country moved on. It's a story that captures the imagination and makes us wonder how such a thing could happen. It's a great story, much more fun than the mundane truth about inconsistent paperwork and bureaucratic oversight. The legend is far more entertaining than the reality of missing signatures and lost files. We love tales of government goof-ups, and this one stuck. It's the kind of story people repeat at gatherings, laughing at the idea of Congress making such a colossal mistake. The myth exploded in 1953, when Congress finally fixed the problem for Ohio's 150th anniversary. Suddenly, newspapers everywhere were buzzing with headlines about Ohio's delayed statehood. Headlines claimed Ohio was only now officially a state, as if the state had been waiting in the wings all those years, just hoping to be recognized. The real issue was just historical tidiness. Ohio was never at risk of being kicked out. The paperwork was messy, but the state's place in the Union was never truly questioned. Its senators, laws, and citizens were always recognized. Ohioans voted, served in Congress, and lived their lives as Americans, never doubting their statehood. The myth persists because it's simple, funny, and memorable. It's a story that makes bureaucracy seem both ridiculous and oddly charming. It turns a minor paperwork gap into a legendary bureaucratic blunder, transforming a dull administrative error into a tale for the ages. But the truth is, Ohio's statehood was never in doubt. The state was always part of the nation, even if the paperwork was a little late. The story endures because it's just too good to let go. It's a reminder that sometimes the best stories are the ones that make us smile, even if they aren't quite true. Sometimes a good myth beats a boring fact. And in the case of Ohio, the legend of the forgotten state lives on, long after the paperwork was finally put in order. So, was Ohio really a state from 1803 to 1953? Absolutely. Ohio functioned as a state in every way, sending representatives, voting in elections, and being recognized by the courts. This is called de facto status, existing in fact, even if the paperwork isn't perfect. The 1953 congressional resolution was symbolic, not substantive. It retroactively declared Ohio a state as of March 1, 1803. Congress wasn't admitting Ohio in 1953, they were just making the record tidy. The missing document had zero real impact. Ohio's statehood was affirmed by everyone's actions for 150 years. Sometimes practice and mutual recognition matter more than a single piece of paper. The 1953 fix was just the period at the end of a sentence everyone had already read. Ohio was always a state, just missing a formal invitation. How did this paperwork gap happen? Simple early American government was small and informal. There was no strict template for statehood, just a few prior examples. The Enabling Act and Ohio's Constitution met all the requirements. Congress focused on substance, not ceremony. There was no controversy, everyone supported Ohio's admission. No one was looking for a reason to delay or block it. The process went smoothly, so no one noticed the missing resolution. Later, passing a formal admission act became standard, but in 1803, it wasn't yet a habit. Ohio's forgotten paperwork was just a product of normalcy, not crisis. Sometimes history's quirks come from things going right, not wrong. When Congress fixed the record in 1953, they had to pick Ohio's official birthday. They chose March 1, 1803, the day Ohio's legislature first met. That's when Ohio truly became a self-governing state. The date celebrates local agency statehood as something created by the people, not just granted by Congress. The federal steps were important, but the real beginning was Ohioans taking charge. This choice highlights the difference between law and lived reality. It's a reminder that history is shaped by both paperwork and people. Ohio's story shows how flexible the Constitution can be and how precedent matters. Sometimes, what everyone agrees is true becomes the truth. And sometimes a missing piece of paper can make history a lot more interesting.